So, Chris Silber, good to see you. So, let's start at the beginning. What got you into writing?
What got me to writing? It happened very quickly, very early in life. I think I stepped into the arena of storytellers, meaning the place where our fantasies battle with the real world forever. I stepped into that arena very young because I had a lot of theater people in my family, and I played theater from when I was a kid, and I felt like also making up my own stories. So I built some theater boxes, and I would play out my own little stories at home. So the first time I remember actually writing a story was pretty much as soon as I was able to write. I just wrote a couple of words from my grandpa when I was maybe 5 years old or something like that. So I was always into making up stories and living sort of partly in a fantasy world.
So, when did that morph into you started a screenwriting career?
Yes, the actual screenwriting career was a result of a couple of things. I worked at first. I started making money from writing pretty early. I wrote articles about music. I know you're also a music guy, so I was pretty much like the East German version of Almost Famous. I was touring with bands and writing about them. I had a band and was into writing about music. My grandfather was a sports journalist, so I guess I picked my own thing and I wrote about music. And then from there, I did a couple of little journalistic things, and then I started writing working as a translator, and I translated. Um, One of the things I got to do as a translator was do a couple of books on American film because I grew up bilingually and had a big passion for film. And then I ended up translating the German book version, print version of Pulp Fiction by Tarantino. And at that time, I had already been working with some kids from film school. I was still like very young, was very early 20s, and had been dreaming about figuring out how to make films, write films, be in films, and but the storytelling was more and more becoming big. I'd also written some plays, going like all the way back from my theater boxes to the bigger thoughts, and film became more and more fascinating to me, and realizing that you could actually do that as a job. And so I ended up through the theater production, through the Tarantino book, I got seen by someone, or I caught the attention of a famous theater director who hired me for a big theater production, very big at the Burg Theater in Vienna. And he had friends in film. And before I knew it, I had my first TV job.
Wow.
Yeah,
So, it and all your music stuff, that was all Berlin?
that was mostly Berlin, East Germany. I grew up behind the Iron Curtain. So one film that I worked on, if I move the camera, you can see Goodbye Lenin, that tells a bit of the story. I was one of the writers of that. Growing up behind the Iron Curtain, touring different little towns in East Germany with bands, and then the play actually happened in Vienna. By that time, the wall had come down. I was 18 when the wall fell, and
What do you
living
remember
back
about
then.
that?
I, so much. I mean, I keep writing about it and thinking about it and keep discovering more and more of what it really meant to me. I'm actually currently writing a children's book about the Berlin Wall, a book for young readers, um, because it's disappeared. The crazy thing is that it was so real, so very real, and that so many people. I literally walking to school in the morning as a kid, because back then we all walked to school as little kids. There was no, it wasn't like today with all this safety stuff around kids. East Berlin was actually pretty safe when I was a kid, relatively safe. My area wasn't great, but anyway, I would walk down the street and I would see on the main road where my school was. If I turned to the left, I would see the wall at the end of that street, and to the right was my school. Just a couple of blocks down was the wall, and so the wall was very real to me. And I had an aunt behind it. I had a stepfather who was able to go west all the time because he had lived in England in exile, and who was born in England, like raised in England during the war, and so because of that, he was free to travel. But we couldn't go, and most of the people around me were telling me that this wall would be there forever, that it was, um, the eternal empire. And what Hitler tried to build, people say, was now coming was now in a different form happening, and an eternal solution, two German states. Um, I didn't believe in that. I remember feeling that this absurd like separation of a town couldn't work. I had this. I don't know. This sounds weird, I guess, or poetic, but as I said, I've been a poet from childhood. But I always felt like the soul of Berlin was talking to me, and that the soul of Berlin was not okay with separation eventually, and that somehow that mixed with the realities of world economics and politics would eventually lead to a situation where this wall would have to fall. And it turns out I was right.
Yeah. No, that I mean, were you overjoyed when it happened? Were you like was there celebration? Like
There
what?
were mixed emotions, right? When it came down, on the one hand, of course, there was this. I mean, I was 18 years old. It was perfect time because it meant now I can go discover and conquer because I had dreams. I had global dreams as a
Mhm.
kid. So that was cool. And the other thing was that there was also a little bit of apprehension or even fear in terms of what would happen to the country and to the political atmosphere in the country because I did know quite a lot as a child from a pretty smart from a family of very smart people, and a lot of them like also being into philosophy, economics, and others into arts. I had a keen sense of what of the problems of capitalism, if you want to call it that way.
Mm.
Um, and as much as East German socialism was a bubble that couldn't eventually succeed because it was, financed by credits from the West at the end, um, and the whole global situation just changed. And there was obviously were a lot of political issues, with lack of freedom of thought and lack of freedom of travel and stuff. Eventually, that bubble had to burst. But at the same time, the radical land grabbing and this like just the takeover from the west to the east, I knew wouldn't be pretty, and it
Mm.
wasn't. It wasn't. A lot of people in the east sort of got uh, told in the process that they were less worthy than people from the west just because they were from the east. It was discrimination. There was a brutality to it that you still can feel today, and I think it would be wise to consider all that when people want to understand why there's why the east has a tendency toward more radical political thought.
Mm.
You
Right.
sort of sow the seed for that. I'm not apologizing for people that are radicals because I of course detest racism and all those things, and at the same time looking at it from a broader perspective, you create that when you let people
Hmm.
down, in a larger frame.
So, getting into, some more like of just the creative process, how does, especially everything you just mentioned, how does that inform the topics that you choose? Because you write about a lot of historical topics, and
Yes.
you've gotten into different genres, which we're going to dive into that a bit more later.
Mhm.
But how does that inform the topics that you pick?
Massively. I think part of my, as I said, like, I stepped into the storytelling arena so early in life, and part of it has to do with the fact that I was already gifted with so much story. I was given so much story as a child, from growing up, because there were, I mean, if I got into this, we would need a whole nother hour, but let's just say I have people in my family that have participated in world history in pretty stunning ways.
Mm.
And so I had a lot of story to process from childhood. A lot of it actually way too heavy for a child, related to the Holocaust, related to World War II, and also times before that, related to secrets that had to be unearthed in my family because several of them had Jewish origins but had hidden those roots in order to survive. And to this day, I'm still unearthing more family secrets. So that's one part of. I was already conditioned to sort of have a lot to process, and storytelling became a great way of doing that. And so in that way, I think, yeah, I do a lot of period storytelling, like things like North Face and stuff like that, where I'm confident or comfortable traveling in different time zones because I felt like that was given to me early, and then being a live witness to an event that arguably was literally one of the few times that the entire world watched one thing, which was the fall of the Berlin Wall, um, sort of made sense. It was like, of course that happens to me. Like I've always felt like my life was just created in that way, that I was meant to be someone that processes history and talks about it.
How do you stay creative through moments of grief?
Ooh, that's a big one. Well, yeah, as you know, because we've known each other for a while, I lost my wife of 13 years and the mother of my children to cancer, now almost exactly 10 years ago. In middle of November, it was 10 years ago. And that um, it was, I mean, grief can never be practiced, I guess. I mean, you can't be prepared for grief. I wasn't very well. I had a few losses before that in my life, but of course, nothing of that significance. And when you have a plan for your life, it's very hard to act like you could just move on without that plan happening. So it's not just losing the person that you so deeply love. And it was a very, very special love story, not just because she's gone, I'm saying that, but literally there were so many people around us that always said, your love is so inspiring. It was very, very special. And, I made a film about it. My last day without you posters behind me is actually inspired by her love story, um, while she was still alive. But I'm getting off the topic, but like in terms of staying creative in it, on the one hand, I immediately knew that I would have to process this through my work because there's no other way. Like when I learned that she had cancer and it took a little less than a year for her to eventually die. I knew my only chance was to process this through my creative work, but I wasn't initially able to do that. It was probably the first time where my talent sort of let me down. I was still writing, but I was working on a lot of things that um, sort of were more me relying on my skill to survive and make it through because uh, losing my creative ability and my writing on my relationship with writing on top of losing the love of my life would have been death for me. Because the main pillars of my existence were my life with her, my children, being a father to my children, and my work. And so I couldn't possibly lose my work. Only now, believe it or not, 10 years later, I am truly able to actually write about it. I'm doing it right now. I'm working on a book, which will probably also become a movie about the actual story of how I dealt with the loss and grief. So it's a long answer, and I'm still not sure, because I think everyone's grief is different. Um, you can't time it, you can't schedule it. There's that great line in Succession in the last season, in the final season of Succession, where someone says, "You're scheduling your grief." It says it all. You cannot do it. It could take 5 years. It could take 10 years. Most people will let you down. They won't get it. They won't understand where you're at because it's probably impossible to understand that. But the short answer to the question is, for a long time, I couldn't.
Mhm.
I just had enough professionalism and enough routine in my work to continue until eventually things would come together and I would be a whole enough person again to actually write about my own experience.
Mhm. Yeah, and again, I mean, I know we've talked about this off mic plenty of times, but again, condolences for
Thank you.
everything you've been through. It's a lot. All right, so here's something a little more, a little less heavy hitting. How about just your writing process itself? Do you insist on writing daily? I mean, you have such a prolific body of work. I mean, just the posters behind you, it's covering the wall, and then your
Right.
IMDb page could be like a multi volume just listing book. So what's your process? Do you write daily? Do you have a quota of drafts you like to get out? Like what's the
I
mechanics of
wish. I mean, I do write daily, and if I'm not writing daily, I'm miserable. But it doesn't always work. I don't have like the Stephen King answer of like, I'm in my tower for so and so many hours a day getting this and this many pages out. I do I must be prolific. I know that. My agent always says I'm one of the most productive people she's ever represented, but I don't feel very productive. I usually feel kind of lazy, and probably because I have this German Prussian background where you know, where I always feel like I need to look not just look busy, but really get a lot done and be very disciplined. And I'm not that disciplined. At the same time, I've come to learn. I mean, you write too. You know this, that in order to write for a couple of good hours to get into the zone, I need more hours than that
Mm,
of quietude and focus to enter the zone. So I don't have the Stephen King magic of drinking a cup of tea and then I'm just there. It takes me a little longer.
mm,
And it's a struggle, I would say. I mean, I've just come to embrace and enjoy and accept the struggle. I don't hate it anymore, but it might always be a struggle, you know. But yes, I do write daily, and I will recommend to any beginning writer or people that are in an earlier part of that journey. I always tell them I've taught writing at film school in California for 2 years and stuff, and I always tell young writers create a space and a time in your life for it that is reserved for it. I
right.
have a coffee shop that I go to, even though I have a really nice office here, but at home. But I do hang out at the coffee shop a lot. And that's my space. I put my headphones on. I'm in my zone. The people there know me, and they know to leave me alone. And I can get hours of just that, this tunnel that I need to step into
Mm,
to get my daily workout. And on a good day, I'm coming home happy, and on a not so productive day, I'm kind of miserable.
mm.
Yeah,
So let's talk about your diversion into children's books. You're actually the second
yeah.
young writers author or for young readers author that I've had on the show. So
Interesting.
tell me about that decision.
Yeah, it's funny because behind me is the first cover of my first children's book, and that was called "The Cloud in Our House." I mean, I wrote it in German. That was inspired by my daughter and how she dealt with the grief, with grieving her mother's loss. She was only 4 years old, and she had a very creative, very imaginative approach to dealing with death and imagining where mommy was. She basically imagined this cloud that she was living on. And to this day, even though my daughter's now 14, 10 years later, we send balloons up to that cloud every birthday, every one of my wife's birthdays. And it's actually really for us. It makes people cry when I tell them the story sometimes, but for us, it's actually a really sweet. It's become a sweet thing. Like once a year, she writes a little note to her mom, and just lets her know what's been going on and that she's good and that she loves her, and we send that, and then that's our way of giving that presence a space in our lives without it overwhelming us. And so that creative process of how we got to that is what the children's book is about. And found a wonderful illustrator for it, and Anna from Silber. She's one of the best in Germany. She's just wonderful. And yeah, it became a really beautiful book. I'm very proud of it. And then from that, really, it wasn't intentional. Then I said, oh, I'm enjoying doing this, and it seems like I'm good at it. We had great reviews, and a lot of people really loved the book and had very emotional responses to it. So I thought, what else could I talk about for that audience? And because I had written family entertainment films before in
Mhm.
Germany, quite a few actually, and I enjoyed doing something that my children could watch in the theater. And so now in the same way, I just love the idea that I can make books that I can give to friends who have children. And so yeah, the next one is about the Berlin Wall because I found out that a lot of kids today have no idea what it was, and so I thought would be sweet to tell a fantastic, interesting, imaginative story about it.
Well, and that's so valuable too. I mean, I think a book like that is so helpful,
Hmm.
for all children, but especially children that have gone through something similar to what your daughter had to go through.
Oh yeah.
I mean, one of my first jobs was a little random. I was a mortician's assistant, and
Okay.
this was in high school, and the some of the saddest, a lot of times it was older people. They lived a good life, and that it was sort of a celebration of their life, so to speak. But, I mean, there were times whenever it would be, like, a younger parent, especially. I mean, those are some of the
Mm,
memories I still have because that
mhm,
was sort of I mean, I remember this one in particular, like, they had 2 there was the husband and the wife had passed, and there were 2 kids, and they didn't wanna leave. Like, they didn't wanna leave their mom,
mm. Yeah, that'd
and,
be
in a situation like that, you just keep the doors open until they're ready.
yeah,
And even as a teenager,
mm,
when you're a teenager, you're not at least I wasn't the most, socially aware person. You're kind of in your own
mm,
world. You don't always, but even as a teenager in that moment, I understood what was going on, and I understood that I'm
yeah,
not leaving work until I'm told I can, you know?
right,
So and it was really, I mean, your heart really broke for those kids, you know?
mm. Oh, yeah, I can totally understand, see that, and it's like, I mean, I've been through that obviously over and over. That people on the one hand, I think it's been hard for a lot of people to connect with the experience that my children and I had, and on the other hand, like I said, a lot of people also were overwhelmed with it, understandably, because it's not. There's a lot of romanticizing it, and understandably because it is touching. It's heart, renting or whatever. But on the other hand, it's also just kind of ugly. A lot of it is just ugly. Like I was unreliable. I was stressed out. I was almost bipolar during for years. I had a lot of problems with, and I don't know if bipolar is the right word, but I was, let's just say I was emotionally unstable for sure. And that had unpleasant consequences for my children, for other people in my life, certainly for people I worked with, because I was, I couldn't. I like to not promise anything that I can't keep, but during those days, I didn't even know who I was half of the time. So, I'm just trying to say, like all of that aspect of it is really complicated because it doesn't just take a couple of months and then you're fine. Like for me, I was with this woman for over 13 years. So after it took me 7 8 years to really come back into a place where I felt like, okay, I can now be fully me again, can be productive, and can actually trust that when I say something, I'm going to be able to do it. And some parts of me may never completely be restored. But, that's just apropos what you just were talking about. Yeah.
So let's talk about one of your more recent series, Sam Saxton,
Yes.
which is based on a true story. And
Yes.
I just did. I mean, I just kind of read the Wikipedia, so I didn't read any of the books
Yeah.
about the actual person. But
Hmm.
how much was that? How much of that series was embellished for storytelling's sake versus how much it was just true to his story?
Yeah. Before I get into it, I want to apologize for the title because it's so clumsy, and I honestly do not like it. I love the series that we make, but I can't stand the title because it's actually cumbersome. Sam dash a Saxon. I fought against it and lost, but anyway, please have the anyone out there have the patience to type it in and find it on your Hulu, because you can watch it in the United States. You can watch it all over the world on Disney too, in the US on Hulu. But yeah, the series is good. It's powerful. It's about a person that really existed, and what fascinated me about it is that it's about a black man. Um, who experienced the fall of the Berlin Wall, and the change of systems from east to west from a completely unique perspective. And that perspective meant a lot to me because, growing up, my mother was working at the Institute of Central African History, so I was actually surrounded by quite a lot of African students, and so-called guest students, they were called then, and African immigrants into East Germany, and got to witness some of their journeys. Um, so I guess I just had more black friends than the typical East German. And then later, as life happened, I married a black woman, and I have kids who are biracial, and so because of all that, I felt close to that experience. Um, and a lot of the actual hero of the story, Sam Mafira, was very close to the development process. He wrote his autobiography while we were also working on the series, and it was a great privilege to have him around and have him near and really do whatever we could to make this feel as real as possible to his path while taking some poetic uh, liberty to create a thrilling series. But his life is so full of thrills that I mean, it's pretty incredible. And I'm proud of the result. I really am. And I don't think it got the recognition that it should have gotten. I mean, we did get amazing reviews. Whoever did see us praised us over the moon as a masterpiece and all kinds of great things that critics have written. But it's just, I don't think it got quite where it could have gotten, partly because of the title. And partly maybe also because some people don't are a little afraid of the political dimension of the story.
Yeah, I mean, you guys tackle pretty heavy social issues in that series, and I don't want to get into any specifics. 'Cause I don't want to spoil anything, but I am very tempted right now to ask, be like, well, did he actually have to do that? but but I
I
won't.
mean, most of what
Maybe
happens
off
in there
mic we
is
can.
true.
Okay.
Most of it is actually true. And here and there, we just sort of, we did what you always do with poetic license. You sometimes merge characters and elevate a couple of things, but in essence, all of what you see is true.
hmm So let's engage in a little more shop talk here. You and I had this conversation off mic, in our personal lives that I wanted to ask you, but I was wondering if you would share some of it in this interview as well, and that is kind of just the future of LA and show business. You and I had this
Hmm.
conversation. I know you left California. You are from Berlin originally. You have done a ton of international stuff. I mean, to give everyone a perspective, one day I was on the phone with Chris, and I believe he was in Atlanta and he had a series launching in Italy, a series launching in the UK, and then he was in a writer's room for another series that was going to be domestic. That's the kind of life he has, and it's freaking awesome. So kind of what's your
The Italian thing was a film, but anyway, an
well,
Amazon movie, so it's only half as impressive. No, but yeah, I do a lot of work. I work a lot. But yeah, like you were asking about the LA thing, right? So I'm. This is not just my impression. It's my wife is a Hollywood actor, and she also a writer, and she shares the same impression. She left LA around the same time that I decided to leave. That was before we were dating, but we were already friends. But I watching LA when I first arrived, and of course, like everyone in this industry, whether they're honest or not, at least back then, of course, I dreamed of one day going to Hollywood and just taking a bite out of it, just trying at least trying myself on these streets, so to speak. And I did that for 8 years, and because I had the bilingual background and I had some great credits. And when I arrived in 2011, 2012, it still felt like that. You could basically tell anyone who wants to be in movies is go to LA and meet people and get out there and just do whatever you can. And because it's better to be there than not. It doesn't mean that you're going to make it, obviously, because more people will go and try than will get a chance to do it. But it was the best place to be. But that was a time when a whole system was still in place that had its problems and was working within that setup of problems. You had the agents, you had the managers, you had this whole system of sort of looking for talent constantly, looking for scripts constantly, was still just existing then, and it was slowly falling apart. And then through streamers, through the globalization of the industry, which in many ways is a fortunate event, don't get me wrong, but it was just through the change in terms of the power of agencies the agents and managements, and particularly our segment of the industry in writing and storytelling, it just came to a place where the industry just came to a place where it isn't as necessary to be in one place to make deals. COVID definitely did a big part in that too, in terms of that we just all became really comfortable, with being in rooms like this, like you and I are talking now, not being in the same room. So that whole idea of being in the room where it happens, the in the room was such a big phrase in Hollywood. I want to get you into the room with someone, and now that's a lot of people. I know a lot of people who never physically meet people they're working on big projects with, including myself. I've met a lot of people I've worked on bigger projects with for the first time at the premiere
Hmm.
or doing press with them, and so that combined with very high taxes in California, and just higher costs in general has led to, not just in development but also in production, to a steady decline of LA um, as a powerful place, not just for deal making but also for production. And so I know quite a few executives over there that over the last couple of years have told me we're just barely hanging on in California and we're about to move. And some of them have moved. And one of the places they go to is Atlanta. One reason that my wife went here is that, you know, if as an actor, she had booked roles in Atlanta before, but if as a local hire you live in Atlanta, you actually have a better shot at certain things. She booked a significant role in The Exorcist Believer, for instance, David Gordon Green's film, which came out this year. And I don't think it would have been much harder for her to book that from LA for sure than being
Mm.
local in Atlanta. They were specifically looking for local talent, and she was just able to stay a different way there than probably from an LA generated casting pool. So, all of these things coming together, it's just, is that enough shop talk?
Yeah, no,
It's
no,
just, yeah.
that's, I mean, yeah.
'Cause I can put a project together, an international project, and not all of them work out, of course, but I can get myself at least started by talking to some people in London, in Paris, in Berlin, in Rome, wherever, without ever actually having to be physically in LA to string things together. And that wasn't the case a couple of years ago, and that is a challenge for people who are new in the industry and trying to find their way. It can be a challenge because there's not just one place that you could just run into opportunities. You have to sort of create them in different ways.
Well, do you think there's gonna be kind of a new capital, either domestically or internationally, or do you think it's just kinda gonna be spread around and there's gonna be a handful of decent hubs and that's gonna be the way it goes?
I think that's exactly the way it goes. There's going to be hubs. There are hubs. Berlin has become more of a hub. London is still one of those places, and LA has its role in that, just as Atlanta certainly does at this point. And so yeah, it's just going to be like that. It's going to shift, and I'm excited and looking forward to when also some, because lately Lagos, Nigeria has become more of a hub for international filmmaking. A lot more exciting things are coming out of there, out of South Africa. India has always been strong. So I'm also really looking forward to those hubs rising, and getting to more significance. Because at the end of the day, you know what? The American dominance in storytelling was convenient for Americans and people who to get into wanted to get globally known being American, but it was kind of unfair, right?
Hmm.
The way that Hollywood sort of dominated the world of global storytelling. So, maybe it's good riddance.
Well, I mean, I think that's the best way to look at it because the alternative is just you're just gonna let yourself get washed out. I mean, obviously, that's not something someone at your level has to worry about, but somebody at mine, I mean, that's a thing where we have a choice to make. Where it's like, okay, we can either pay attention to what's going on and adjust accordingly, or we can just cry about the yesteryear, which by the way had its own set of problems anyway.
Exactly.
I got here in 2016, and even back
Hmm.
then, there was a little bit of me that felt like I showed up to the party at last call that has since
Hmm.
been exacerbated with things like the pandemic and then the studio's greed causing the strike and et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah,
And so, I'm kind of just like, well, I could either roll with whatever's next and try to see the opportunity in it. On a personal level, the opportunity for me is, well, maybe I can live in a place, that's not in the US and has an
Right.
easier quality of life than California. but uh
Yes. Yes.
but anyway, that's yeah. So I guess in closing here, I gotta ask you,
Hmm.
um, what are some general? I mean, you've already kind of given out a few as far as as far as daily activity and stuff like that. But what are some tips you would give to up and coming writers and creatives?
I'm always keen on developing your skill and as well as your career from your own circle of influence. And you and I have talked about this. Big opportunities can come, but nobody knows how. There's no, like that saying is still true just for the world now. Like who was it? I think Betty Davis or someone famously said, someone asked, "How do I get into Hollywood?" And she said, "Take Franklin," which is a street
Yeah.
leading into Hollywood. But it's there is no one way to make it into this industry, and because it's so hard, because so many people want to get there, and there's 10,000 possible scripts to one opportunity, or 1,000, or whatever the number is. It's just I wouldn't spend as much time worrying about how to get into that one spot, and I would spend a lot more time thinking about who am I, what is it that I have to say, how can I be the best at saying that and doing that, and how can I, within my circle of influence, test out those stories and find out that, like sort of hone my skills as a storyteller. Just I guess the way that I had my little theater box as a kid, and my audience was my cat and sometimes my mom and some of her friends, but my
Hey,
stuff that
cats are the toughest critics, man. Everything I
hello,
do, yeah.
you're a cat expert. I know you have that whole cartoon thing with your cat going on, which is great. I mean, it's a relationship, and they will let you know. They'll
They'll
just
let you
turn
know.
away. Yeah, when you're boring. No, but seriously, I feel like create something for yourself. I started out making little short films with friends, with like film school friends, and creating off theater productions and stuff like that. I feel like creating the energy that can eventually lead to bigger things, anyone can do that with what they've got around them. Because eventually, from that energy, the next level, and next level, next level will come if it's meant to be. And the people that could get you to another level will be there. The other thing I would say, just in terms of career building, if you find someone that's willing to listen to you and give you a little bit of time of their day, be relentless in in taking advantage of that, because there isn't a lot of those people. Because it, most people say, "Please don't send me your script. I'll never read it, and just leave me alone with your with your stuff." And um, so, if you find anybody kind enough to listen, um, don't be afraid to take advantage of that, because we all need mentors. We all need. I mean, I think for everyone, it's true that no one's ever going to stand on the big stage and win an award. I was lucky enough to win a few, and I still feel like I'm only beginning. Watch out, world! But like winning like an Emmy and stuff like nobody has a statue in their hand and could seriously say, "Well, this was all me." There's always been someone had to believe in you. In order for that to happen. And I think we need sort of a string of people who believe in us as we move on. And so being good at relationships matters as much as this work is sort of alone, sort of lonely. Be good at relationships, like really nurture those, because this
Mhm.
industry is all about relationships.
Where can people go to learn more about you? Where can they, I mean, I know we talked Sam as Saxon, and that is on Hulu for everybody. Go on Hulu, type it out, watch the series. Where can people get the book? What languages is it in right now? Tell everyone everything.
Okay, well, I mean, yeah, Sam Saxon, yeah, like Sam Mafira's book, which is excellent, is also out. And I just look up Samuel Mafira and you'll find it. And the series is on Hulu. I have my children's book out. It's only in German yet, but we're working on an English translation. But if you want to find out, keep in touch with what I'm doing. I'm also working with my wife on a couple of projects. We have a little production company here in Atlanta. We're working on an amazing movie right now about her grandmother who was harassed by land developers at the beautiful age of 94, and grandma
Oh,
became a
wow.
fighter, and the whole world started to witness that, and Tyler Perry and Snoop Dogg and a lot of people started to join the campaign that my wife helped build to support her. So we're working on a film about her called Leave Her Alone. But if you just Google me or my wife, Chris Silber or Tracy Graves, you'll find things about us. I'm also on Instagram um, as real Chris Silber. Um, so yeah, that should be sufficient.
Thanks so much for doing this, Chris.
Sure.